So, hi friends. As you know, the NEET pattern is getting changed into the next pattern, and at DBMCI, we are very much prepared for it. So, here we come up with one very simple topic, yet with very important topic, which can be asked to you in many ways, right? And that is about brachial plexus. So, here we come up with an integrated video about brachial plexus, correlating the anatomical facts and the orthopedic clinical presentations, right? I am Dr. Sushil Vijay, Faculty of Orthopedics at DBMCI, and with me, I have.
Myself, Dr. Shilpi Agarwal, the Faculty of Anatomy in the DBMCI. Now, let's begin first of all with the anatomy of brachial plexus. Now, whenever we talk about the brachial plexus, we know the roots for the brachial plexus. The roots of the brachial plexus, it is from C5 to T1. And in this, we should be aware that these roots are actually the ventral rami of T5 to C5 to T1. Now over here, when we are talking about the formation of this plexus, we say the roots, they lead to the formation of trunks, and then they further divide into anterior and the posterior divisions, which unite to form the cords, and then the further branches are given. So this pattern is, first of all, the roots are there. The roots lead to the formation of the trunk. Then we have divisions. Then the further cords are formed, which finally give branches, which will be supplying the structures in the upper limb. Now over here, we should be aware of the orientation of these parts, the roots and trunk. This portion, it is present in the neck. So as the roots, they take origin from the spinal nerves, which are coming from the spinal cord. They form the trunk. It is present in the neck. And to be more specific, it is present in the posterior triangle of the neck. The divisions portion, this portion is present behind the clavicle. It is present behind the clavicle. Over here, we can say the roots and trunk, which is present in the neck, it is present above the clavicle. Then after that, this portion, the cords and the branches, this is a portion which is present which is present below the clavicle, or to be more specific, present in the axilla. Now the cords, medial cord, lateral cord and the posterior cord, these cords are specifically related to the first and the second part of the axillary artery, which is present in axilla, and the branches, they are related to the third part of the axillary artery. Now we will further see the formation of this brachial plexus. The roots, as we have mentioned, it is from C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1. The roots, they lead to the formation of trunk. The C5 and C6, it leads to the formation of upper trunk. The lower two, they lead to the formation of the lower trunk, that is C8 and T1. They lead to the formation of lower trunk. And the C7, it continues as the middle trunk. Now these trunks, they will finally divide into anterior and the posterior divisions. I am marking anterior division as A and the posterior divisions as P. The anterior divisions of upper and the anterior division of the middle, it lead to the formation of lateral cord. The anterior division of the lower one, it leads to the formation of medial cord. Posterior divisions of all, that means of the upper as well as middle and the lower, they all combine to form the posterior cord. Now over here, whenever we are talking about the Erb's palsy, we say the C5 and C6. These are the nerves which are involved over here.
Okay, so one important thing, see what madam just told us is that these roots basically, where are they present in the neck area? Okay, so when you talk of the injury to the C5, C6, that is what you call a Erb's palsy, or the C8, T1, what you call a Klumpke's palsy. What is the most common mechanism that has been explained to you? That whenever there is a downward traction over here, what will happen? The upper roots will be getting injured. In what conditions? For example, you are trying to take a delivery, you are an intern, and you don't know how to take a delivery properly. Baby's presentation is by shoulder, by the hand, and you just pull the hand of the baby like down, so it is putting a traction on the neck. So when you pull it down in the downward direction, downward traction creates an injury of the upper roots. In the similar way, upward traction like this, it creates an injury on the lower root, C81. Somebody is falling from height and he tries to hold on to a branch of a tree, right, like that. So this is upward traction. So upward traction causing an injury to the lower roots and downward traction causing an injury to the upper roots. So C5 and the C6 injury, the herbs, you all know is the commonest injury that is related to faulty delivery technique, isn't it? That is what we learn, right? So that is the importance of learning the basic anatomy in this. Okay.
So over here, whenever the upper trunk is involved, we say C5, C6. At this point, we are talking about the Erb's point. What is Erb's point? Erb's point is this point which is present over here. And we say there are 6 nerves which are coming at this Erb's point. C5, C6 which are coming from here, the C5, C6, and finally divides into anterior and posterior division. Apart from this, 2 other nerves which are actually arising from here. These 2 nerves, if we label it as 1 and 2, these 2 nerves which are arising from this point, these are the suprascapular nerve. We have suprascapular nerve, and the nerve, another nerve is nerve 2 subclavius. So finally we can see there are 6 nerves which are present at this point, and we use a term as Erb's point for this.
Okay. So now see this in Erb's point, how the questions can be framed for us if we just change from need to next. Need question is simple. Erb's point is formed by C5, C6. What is the area related to Erb's point? C5, C6. How many nerves are involved? 6 in number. But now the next question. A child was, delivered yesterday night in the labor room, and since birth the child has not been able to move the right side, the right upper limb, and he's keeping the right upper limb by the side of the body, elbow extended and pronated, not moving the right side of the body. What is the most likely diagnosis? Question number 1, right? So clinical scenario. Question number 2, what is the attitude that you see in the Erb's palsy? That is what you call a policeman's step deformity, right? Number 3, what are the muscles involved in Erb's palsy? Number 4, what are the attitude or what is the movement lost in Erb's palsy? These are the simple many questions that we need to answer. So let's see how these C5, C6 and suprascapular nerve to subclavius, anterior and posterior division, how they are going to affect it. You'd like to take it, ma'am? Yeah.
Now within this Erb's palsy, we say that these nerves which are mentioned over here, they are being involved. So for the Erb's palsy, we say the limb, it goes into a attitude which is given the term as policeman tip deformity. Now what is the attitude of the limb in policeman tips deformity? The attitude of the limb is the upper limb, it goes into extension. The extension is at the level of the elbow. Then we say the limb is adducted. The adduction movement is there. Then the upper limb, it is medially rotated, so medial rotation. And apart from this, we say at the level of the forearm, it is pronated. So the pronation movement is there. So the whole of the limb, it is having this total attitude, and we say if we talk about what movements are lost, then the movements which are lost is loss of flexion is there, loss of abduction is there, loss of lateral rotation is there, and loss of supination is there. And this is a position which is said that it looks like as if a person is asking for tip. So that is why it is given the term as policeman tip deformity. It can also be termed as waiter's tip deformity or the porter's tip deformity.
Okay, so I'll just add it here. As ma'am said, the limb attitude. What it said, the arm here, which is over here, is adducted. Okay, elbow extended, forearm pronated, and obviously the whole limb gets into internal rotation. Now, if somebody asks you what is the attitude, that's the attitude. That is what you call a policeman's tip deformity. What is lost? Lost is fibers, flexion, abduction, external rotation, and supination. Right? So fibers is lost, and policeman tip is the deformity seen in Erb's palsy. Next is related to these movements. What are the muscles involved? Let's see that also. So now the important point noted here is that this is the attitude that you are going to see in any patient of Erb's palsy. That is extension, adduction, medial rotation, and pronation. How so? The arm will be adducted close to the body. Elbow will be extended, right? And forearm, this is pronated now. So whole the limb, the upper limb is getting into internal rotation. So now if somebody asks you what is the attitude of the limb in Erb's palsy, it is policeman's tip deformity. If somebody asks you the second question, that what are the movements lost? So if I tell you the movements lost in Erb's palsy, what are those? If it is an extension, if that's extension, it should be a flexion. It is lost. Second, if it is an adduction, obviously abduction is lost. If it is a medial rotation, then it is external rotation or lateral rotation is lost. And then pronation, that means supination is lost. Very simple. So 2 questions, very simply they can be asked to you here. Number 3, they can ask you very simply, very cleverly, they can ask you, name the muscles involved, right? Or they can simply give a table or options, 4 options, A, B, C, D. Which of these is not involved in Erb's palsy? So third would be, what are the muscles involved? The muscles involved in Erb's palsy, they are, number 1, if the flexion of elbow is involved, what are the muscles responsible for it? Number 1, the biceps and the brachialis. Okay, so these 2 are involved. If the abduction is hampered, that means he's not able to abduct. So which muscles initiate your abduction? One is supraspinatus, and after supraspinatus, what's that? It is deltoid. So these 2 are gone from the abduction part. External rotation, which 2 muscles? The infraspinatus and the teres minor. Okay, and when supinator is gone, obviously it is a supinator muscle. So these are the muscles involved. These are 3 types of questions which can be asked to you, framed to you, like in the clinical scenarios as we just discussed. So 3 important things about the Erb's palsy you should remember. Okay.
Now, after the Erb's palsy, when the lower trunk of the brachial plexus is involved, in that case, the C8 and T1 nerves are the one which are most commonly involved. So C8 and T1, it leads to the Klumpke's palsy, and it will further lead to a deformity which we term as the claw hand. Now, when we talk about the claw hand, the Klumpke palsy, C8 T1 nerve, these are basically supplying the intrinsic muscles of the hand. So the intrinsic muscles of the hand which are being supplied over here. And when this supply is lost, we say there is a deformity termed as claw hand.
Now, just I would like to add here, the Klumpke's palsy, it leads to claw hand. Why so? It's very simple. C8T1 injury mechanism I have already explained to you. Then when there is an upward traction, somebody was falling down, try to hold on to a branch of the tree, and sudden severe traction like this, right? Or sudden severe traction here at the neck area, it will lead to injury around the C8T1. Now, why claw hand? Because the intrinsic muscles of the hand, how many are they? I get the response different in different classes. Some say 10, sir, somewhere around 12, 15. So all in all, they are around 20 in the hand, right? And what is their function? Function is very simple. Intrinsic muscle. If I tell you a broad function, right? Fine movements and all are different. One broad function is to keep a flexion at the MCP here like this and extension at the eyepiece, right? The combined action of the lumbricals and the interossei like this. This is a normal posture that my intrinsics are okay. If intrinsics are paralyzed, what is going to happen? I'll assume a opposite posture. For example, what is going to happen now? MCP gets into extension and fingers get into flexion. That's what you call a claw hand. That's why Klumpke's lead to a claw hand deformity because of palsy of all the intrinsic muscles of the hand. That is the same root value that you go for in the ulnar nerve, isn't it? And that's what you call a ulnar claw hand also, right? But obviously in the ulnar nerve injury, the site of injury will be different. It will be somewhere in the arm area, elbow area, forearm area like that. But in Klumpke's, it is somewhere in the neck area. That is what we just discussed, that where is the roots are present. Okay. Second thing, not only the claw hand, C8T1 is also responsible for the sensory loss, where the C8, this area, marginal area here, and T1 here. Okay, so sensory loss on the medial aspect of the hand and of the forearm, right? Now, just one important clinical point I would like to add here, that in majority of the books, what we read, Klumpke's paralysis is always related to Horner's. No, it's not like that. But when the Klumpke palsy, the C8T1 injury, it is related to cervical sympathetic injury, then what happens is what you call a Horner syndrome. It is not always that Klumpke's is always related to Horner's, but yes, in majority cases, it can be related to the cervical sympathetic chain injury. That's what you call a Horner's syndrome. So Klumpke's can be related to Horner's.
Now over here, when we are saying the Horner syndrome, in this Horner syndrome, it is one of the component which is found in the Klumpke's, and we say this specifically the T1. The T1 nerve which has been mentioned over here, it is the one which is actually sometimes carrying the fibers of the sympathetic fibers which are running. And if this, along with T1 fiber, if these sympathetic nerve fibers are affected, it may also lead to Horner syndrome, as sir has also mentioned. And when we talk about this Horner syndrome, it is a set of symptoms. We say there are 5 components in the Horner syndrome, which can be asked as an MCQ from you. Now, what are the various components in this? One is the meiosis, that is the constriction of the pupil. Then anhidrosis. Anhidrosis is absence or decreased sweating of the face. Then we have anophthalmos. Anophthalmos is sunken eyeballs. So meiosis is there, anhidrosis, anophthalmos is there. Then another feature is ptosis. Ptosis is that the patient is not able to elevate the upper eyelid. So there is drooping of the eyelids. And the fifth component is loss of ciliospinal reflex. Loss of ciliospinal reflex. In this reflex, what actually happens is when you pinch the skin of this nape, if you pinch the skin of the nape, there should be ideally mydriasis, or we say dilatation should be there of the pupil. Now, because this whole reflex is due to the sympathetic fibers, if the sympathetic fibers are lost, the dilatation will not be seen, and we use the term as there is loss of ciliospinal reflex, which is the component of this Horner's syndrome. Now over here we have just talked about the formation of brachial plexus and the herbs in the Klumpke's palsy. Now the branches of the brachial plexus, when we talk about the branches, apart from the branches given off by the cords, we have few branches which directly arise from the roots or which directly arise from the trunk. Now when we talk about the branches which directly arise from the root, the branches from the roots, there are two branches which arise from the roots, and if we go back to this picture over here, one of the branch it arises directly from C5. This is the dorsal scapular nerve. I am writing DS for this. Another, it is arising from C5, C6 and the C7. This is the long thoracic nerve. Now over here, this long thoracic nerve is clinically significant to us. When we talk about the long thoracic nerve,
So long thoracic nerve, as the ma'am said, it is arising from which roots? The C5, C6 and C7. Now what is the clinical relevance? This nerve, basically what it is supplying? The serratus anterior muscle. And how we are going to check that serratus anterior muscle? Ask the patient to push against the wall, right? And what is going to happen? If the serratus anterior is weak on a particular side, what will happen is the winging of the scapula becomes prominent on that particular side, right? So clinically relevant nerve, again, the long thoracic nerve coming from C5, C6 and C7. Serratus anterior, winging of scapula. Next.
The long thoracic nerve, it is also termed as nerve of Bell or nerve to Bell. This again can be asked as a question from you, and as we have just discussed, it leads to the formation of, if there is injury to this, it leads to the formation of the winging of scapula. For the winging of scapula, we say there is a prominence of medial border and the inferior angle of scapula. Now this again can be asked as a MCQ, that which portion of the scapula is prominent. Now, whenever we say that these border is prominent, the medial border and inferior angle, this is actually due to the unopposed action of the rhomboids major and the minor. Because the rhomboids major and minor, they are acting as the detractors of the scapula, and the serratus anterior, which is actually supplied by this long thoracic nerve, this is the detractor. This is the chief protractor of the scapula, and that protraction action is lost. So completely we say that due to the supply of the serratus anterior which is lost, this is loss of protraction, and there is unopposed retraction by the rhomboids muscle.
Okay, so one thing ma'am has already pointed out, that this suprascapular nerve that you see, the suprascapular nerve and nerve to subclavius. Now what is the clinical relevance here of the suprascapular nerve, which is coming from where? The trunk, the upper trunk, okay, branches from the trunk. Now this suprascapular nerve, it supplies your two main muscles, supraspinatus and the infraspinatus. Now this supraspinatus, infraspinatus, what all you need to remember from the clinical point of view? Supraspinatus is one of the muscle which makes your rotator cuff, right? SITS, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor and the subscap, okay, subscapularis. Supraspinatus muscle is the most common muscle which is getting injured in this rotator cuff injury, okay. Suprascapular supplies both of these nerves, supraspinatus and infraspinatus. If anyhow the suprascapular nerve is injured, what will be the clinical presentation of the patient? Supraspinatus, it causes abduction of the shoulder from 0 to 15 degrees. That simply means abduction, initiation. If suprascapular is injured, paralyzed because of some reason, then this 0 to 15, that is initiation of abduction, cannot be done. If you help the patient to go for abduction like this, after that he will be able to do because of action of deltoid supplied by some other muscle, other nerve. Okay, but then this initiation will not be possible. That is supraspinatus. Infraspinatus, as we already discussed, infraspinatus is responsible for external rotation of the shoulder, that patient won't be able to do so, right? So one branch from the trunk which is very clinically very much relevant is suprascapular nerve, supplying supraspinatus and infraspinatus, failure of initiation of abduction and external rotation. Now moving on to the cord.
Just before moving to the cord, the branches which are given from the trunk, as we have just mentioned, we should know that what is the root value. Both are having the root value C5 and C6.
Okay.
Now we move to the branches from the cords, starting with the lateral cord. When we talk about the lateral cord, it gives 3 branches. And all the 3 branches of the lateral cord, they will be having the root value C5, C6 and C7. Now what are the branches? One is the lateral pectoral nerve. Then we have lateral root of median nerve. And lastly, we have the musculocutaneous nerve. Lastly is the musculocutaneous nerve. Now over here, the lateral pectoral nerve, it is going to supply the pectoralis major muscle. The lateral root of median nerve, it will combine with the medial root of median nerve and it will lead to the formation of the median nerve. Oh, the musculocutaneous nerve, a very significant nerve over here. This musculocutaneous nerve here, over here, we have already said the root value for this is the C5, C6, C7, and this is the nerve for the anterior compartment of arm over here. And the 3 muscles which are included for the anterior compartment of arm, it is BBC, that is biceps. Then we have brachialis. The biceps brachii is there. Then we have brachialis and the coracobrachialis. After giving supply to these 3 muscles, this musculocutaneous nerve, it continues as a cutaneous nerve, and that is the lateral cutaneous nerve of forearm. So now we know that one of the cutaneous nerve which is on the lateral side of the forearm, it is actually a branch of the musculocutaneous nerve.
And now see the clinical relevant things. If somehow the musculocutaneous nerve is getting damaged, what all are getting affected? The biceps brachialis and coracobrachialis. So what will be the action lost if somehow the musculocutaneous nerve is injured? Biceps brachialis responsible for what? Your flexion of the elbow. And coracobrachialis responsible for what? The flexion and adduction secondary of the shoulder, right? So these 2 actions of these 3 muscles will be lost if somehow the musculocutaneous nerve is injured.
Now we come to the rest of the branches from the cords. Now we will come to the medial cord. The medial cord, it is giving 5 branches. When we talk about the 5 branches of the medial cord, one is the medial pectoral nerve. The medial pectoral nerve, again it supplies the pectoralis major muscle. Then we have medial root of median nerve, which combines with the lateral root to form the median nerve. Apart from this, from the medial cord only, we have the cutaneous branches to the arm and forearm, and these are the medial cutaneous branch of arm as well as of the forearm. And lastly, one branch which is the ulnar nerve. Now over here, if we talk about the root values, all the nerves over here, they have the root value C8 and T1. Only the ulnar nerve is the one which is having root value C7, C8 and T1, because it gets a communicating branch from C7. So therefore the root value is C7, C8 and T1.
Now about these branches. See, the ulnar nerve, these are 5, and out of these clinically relevant, you all know, are 2 basically. When the median root of median and the lateral root of median, when they combine, what they make is a median nerve, right? Now, how the questions, clinically relevant questions are being asked to you about the ulnar nerve and the median nerve. One most important thing you should all remember, everybody should remember is ulnar and median nerve, these 2 nerves, they supply everything in the front of the upper limb. Front mean all the flexor compartment, point 1. Second point, ulnar and median doesn't supply anything in the arm. There is no supply of median and ulnar in the arm. That means when a patient comes to you for some clinical presentation, everything will be seen below the forearm. And what joint we have below the forearm? One is wrist, one is thumb, and third is finger, right? So whenever somebody with the median or the ulnar nerve injury comes, manifestation will be only seen at wrist, thumb and fingers, only three. No shoulder, no elbow, nothing, zero. It becomes very, very simple. Okay. Backside is all belong to the radial nerve that we are just going to discuss after that. Okay. So when you discuss about the median and the ulnar nerve, be very much sure that what you have to examine is the wrist, thumb and fingers. Now when you talk about the supply, right, the supply of the median and the ulnar, it's very simple. 3.5 of these fingers, right, partial of this also, and 1.5 of these fingers, the little finger, the medial finger and the ring finger. Okay, so 3.5 and 1.5. The isolated, there is something known as a specific supply or the specific anatomic zones. So little fingers, the tip of little finger, it specifically is supplied by ulnar nerve. Okay, the index finger, the tip, it is specifically supplied by the median nerve. And then this dorsum of the first web space, it belongs to the superficial branch of the radial nerve, which was your question in this year 2019 exam. They had marked this this area, this region, and they asked that which is the nerve supplied by supplying this particular region, right? That was the arrow marked to this area. Okay, so these are number one, the tip of index, tip of little finger and the back of the first dorsum web space. Okay, so ulnar and median manifestations are seen only in the wrist, thumb and the fingers. What all manifestations we can see clinically if you talk about them? Median nerve, the simple and the best, the implication, clinical implication would be, the important thing you should remember that all these thenar eminence, this thenar eminence, all the muscle in the thenar eminence, they are getting a supply from median nerve, except for two that you should remember for PGME purpose. What are those? One is abductor pollicis longus, right, APL, which is getting a supply from the radial nerve. And second exception is a adductor pollicis, this one. Adductor pollicis gets a supply of ulnar nerve. Yes, you heard me right. Ulnar nerve, which is supplying this side of the hand, is controlling this side also by adductor pollicis. Okay. Similar way, the FDP, flexor digitorum profundus and superficialis. You all know that FDP, it supplies what? It supplies the proximal IP joints. And flexor digitorum superficialis, it supplies the distal IP joints. But this FDP of these three fingers, median, of these two, ulnar. FDS of all the four fingers is getting a supply by median nerve. Getting my point? The purpose to tell you this all is about the clinical implications, the clinical manifestations. How? FDP, FDS, when it is paralyzed in this side, on this 3.5 finger, the clinical implication that we see in the median nerve palsy is what you call a pointing index sign. How? Ask the patient to clench a fist and these two actually remains extended, but classically described as a pointing index sign like this. Or the other name is Ochsner clasp sign like this. That's what you call a Ochsner clasp sign. These two extended and Ochsner clasp sign. So median nerve. Okay. So pointing index is a classical feature of the median nerve injury. Question has been asked to you already in the JIPMER exam 2017, where they simply asked post RTA, upper limb trauma, patient was asked to make a fist and picture is as shown in the image. Picture was like this, right? What they asked is which nerve is injured. So when the index finger cannot be flexed, FDP, FDS both are injured. That means it is an injury to median nerve, right? On contrary, if you talk of the ulnar nerve that is on this side, FDS I said is all supplied by the median nerve, right? So even if the ulnar is injured, even if the FDP is injured, FDS will be spared if it is isolated ulnar nerve injury. Now when you ask the patient to flex the finger, he will be able to flex at this point, the last joint, but he won't be able to flex at the distal joint. Proximal he will be able to flex, but not distal. This is what you call a ulnar paradox, right? So this is another PGME question, that ulnar paradox is because of. So it is because of involvement of flexor digitorum profundus. Sorry, not FDS. Okay, FDS getting a full supply from the median nerve. FDP getting supply partially from median and partially from ulnar. That's the reason for ulnar paradox. So ulnar nerve injury, ulnar paradox here, right? Second, median nerve injury, pointing index here. And you know that ulnar nerve injury, it is root value, the C7, C8 and T1 supplying what? The intrinsics. So all in all, what it is going to lead to is what you call a claw hand.
So regarding the the ulnar nerve, we say the deformity which can be due to this is the claw hand, and to be more specific, we say it is a partial claw hand, because only the ulnar side of the hand is the fingers over here, they go into the clawing. So the partial claw hand is there. If the question is regarding the complete claw hand when both the median as well as the ulnar nerves are involved. So in that, all the fingers will go into clawing. For the ulnar nerve, as we have just mentioned, we will just summarize. The ulnar nerve is the one which supplies two muscles in the forearm, and the two muscles are flexor carpi ulnaris and the medial half of flexor digitorum profundus. And when we talk about the hand, this is the nerve which is supplying the most of the muscles of the hand. It is supplying all the hypothenar muscles. Then it supplies all lumbricals. It supplies all interossei. As well as it supplies the palmaris brevis. So the palmaris brevis, it is also supplied by it. And one of the thenar group muscles which is being supplied by the ulnar nerve is adductor pollicis. It is the adductor pollicis. This nerve, the median nerve, because it is supplying the majority of the muscles of the hand, it is also considered as the musician nerve. It is also considered as a musician nerve. When we talk about the median nerve, as we were talking about this median nerve, first thing you should know that what is the root value of the median nerve, because the median and the lateral root, both of they combine. So all the roots will be contributing into the median nerve. Root value is from C5 to T1. Now it supplies all the muscles of the forearm except the muscles being supplied by this ulnar nerve. So the median nerve, it supplies all the muscles including pronator teres, then it supplies the flexor carpi radialis, the palmaris longus, the flexor digitorum superficialis, pronator quadratus, and the lateral half of flexor digitorum profundus. Over here we say the deeper muscles. The deeper muscles are the pronator quadratus and this lateral half of flexor digitorum profundus. It is being supplied by a branch of median nerve, and that branch is anterior interosseous nerve. Then apart from this, it is supplying all the rest of the muscles of the hand, which is apart from this ulnar nerve. So the muscles which are left is, in the hand we will be having in the thenar group, we will be having the rest of the three muscles, that is the flexor pollicis brevis, then we have the abductor pollicis as well as the apponens pollicis. Now over here, this median nerve, it also supplies the first and second lumbrical. First and second lumbrical. So the ulnar nerve, when we talk about the ulnar nerve is supplying actually the third and fourth lumbrical. So for the ulnar nerve, we have third and fourth lumbrical. The deformities which are being associated by the median nerve, as being mentioned by sir, one of the deformity, it is the pointing index. It is a pointing index. Then apart from this, we have ape thumb deformity. When we talk about this ape thumb deformity, the thumb, it goes into adduction and it is slightly laterally rotated. And one of the other deformity is benediction sign. In the benediction sign, these two fingers, when you try to make the fist, these two fingers, they are not able to flex, and we say it is a benediction sign or the benediction deformity. The median nerve, it is also termed as the laborer's nerve. Then over here we have few tests which are done to test the integrity of these nerves. So for the median nerve, we have the three tests which are for the median nerve. One test for the median nerve, and the test is the pen test. The pen test is done to check the integrity of the median nerve.
Okay. So I would like to add a few things. Very wonderfully explained. Now anatomy part is okay. Now coming on to the orthopedic part. I'll start from this again, the ulnar nerve. Now as mentioned, the ulnar nerve leads to claw hand. What claw hand? The partial claw hand. How? Like this. These two claw, these two extended. Isn't it? There is a claw. These two are okay. These are normal, and there is a claw here. That is what you call a partial ulnar claw. 1 point. Please remember this. This will come again when we talk the median nerve. Okay. Second is flexor carpi ulnaris. As I said, whenever there is a ulnar or the median nerve injury, how we should proceed? Wrist, thumb and fingers. So in the wrist, we have got two main flexors. Flexor carpi ulnaris radialis on this side and flexor carpi ulnaris on this side. Right? These two are my flexors of the wrist. Now if both my flexors are okay, I make a fist and flex it down. Okay. If radialis is okay and if ulnaris is okay, what will happen? My wrist will come down in neutral position. If suppose radialis is paralyzed or ulnaris is paralyzed, what is going to happen? The wrist will deviate in opposite direction. If my ulnar nerve is injured, this is paralyzed, what will happen? When I flex it down, it will have a radial deviation. Similarly, with the median nerve injury, it will go into opposite deviation, right? Medial half of FDP, this side FDP, how you have checked for it? Ask the patient to flex the fingers. FDS will be flexed, FDP won't be flexed. So what did we call it? This medial half FDP. That is what ma'am has mentioned, medial half FDP. This is what we call the ulnar paradox. Okay, hand hypothenar muscles in this. See, one important thing you all can appreciate here is that these 3 and 4 lumbrical always have a divided supply. 3 and 4 by ulnar, 1 and 2 by the median nerve. But intraossei, they have all got the same supply, that is by ulnar nerve. That's the same reason it contributes to the ulnar claw hand. Okay, now this adductor pollicis that is mentioned over here. Adductor pollicis, I told you, is an exception over here, which actually is the muscle supplied by ulnar nerve. Being on lateral side, external side, and being supplied by ulnar nerve. How do we test it? We ask the patient to hold something between the thumb and the finger. Let's suppose this is something, some object, and we ask the patient to hold it between the thumb and fingers. Adductor power. Now, if this adductor power is okay, he'll be able to hold it. Else what will happen? This object will just fall down. This test has been described in our Asian literature as a book test. Okay, if the patient is not able to do so, what he will do is, instead of holding it like this, adduction, he will try to pinch it. Instead of using the adductor pollicis, patient uses flexor pollicis. Use of flexor pollicis instead of adductor pollicis is what we call a Froment sign, right? So Froment sign will be seen in thumb, but it's a sign of actually ulnar nerve injury, right? So adductor pollicis, book test, and Froment sign. Things to remember from here. Okay, and do remember one important thing what we said, ulnar claw like this, these two extended and other two medial two fingers flexed. Coming on to this side, the median nerve. Now pointing index, I explained to you why there is a pointing index. What exactly is a pen test? Pen test is just a name given to the Asian literature. In the what you call international literature, we usually don't find the name of this pen test. What they say, ask the patient to keep the hand on a table like this, right? And keep something over the palm in the ear like this, and ask the patient to abduct the thumb. Now you see your thumb and the fingers, they are almost at 90 to each other. They are not in the same plane. Okay, abduction, adduction of finger is in relation to this central finger. Going away, abduction, coming closer, adduction. And then this thumb, abduction is going up in air, going back to neutral is adduction. Ask the patient to touch something kept in air for this time like this. This is abduction. But do remember, this is what we are checking. The median nerve is abductor pollicis brevis, because there is a longest counterpart which is getting a supply from radial nerve. So this test can be very well falsely positive. Okay, so exception muscle, abductor pollicis longus getting a supply from radial nerve. Pen test, abductor pollicis brevis. Pointing index we have already discussed. Coming to next, about this anterior interosseous nerve. Now see this. What ma'am has clearly mentioned, lateral half of FDP. That means this flexor digitorum profundus. This is pollicis, digitorum profundus. Now how do we check for this? FDP of this index, FDP, that is last joint, and flexor pollicis of the thumb. Ask the patient to flex the thumb, IP of the flex of the thumb, and ask the patient to flex the IP, distal IP of the finger like this. Ask the patient to hold it like this. This is what you call a OK sign, right? OK sign, also known as Killow-Nevin sign, KILOH, NEVIN, Killow-Nevin sign, right? So OK sign or Killow-Nevin sign. If the patient is able to do so, that means his anterior interosseous nerve is fine. The nerve which is supplying the flexor of the finger and thumb is perfectly okay, right? This nerve, anterior interosseous nerve, is most commonly injured in which fracture? Another clinical question to you. Fracture is somewhere over here. That is supracondylar humerus fracture in a child, right? So AMRU was the sequence. When you discuss about the supracondylar fractures, the AMRU is the sequence of nerve involved, right? Anterior interosseous nerve followed by median nerve, followed by radial nerve, followed by ulnar nerve. So if you get a patient of your supracondylar fracture with you, ask the child to do like this. If he can flex IP of thumb and DIP of finger, index finger, his AIN is okay. So if he can make a okay, everything is okay. Now, one important thing is about this sign. Now, ma'am said just anatomy part. What she said, that if there is a this pointing index should be like this. That means patient will be able to flex these two, but these two remain extended. In the ulnar, what happened? Ulnar claw happened, so these two remain extended. This is what you call a Benedict hand sign. If you have ever seen the Pope, you know, the great Pope in the Rome, Vatican City, how they greet the people? They greet the people like this. Okay, so this is what you call a this Benedict hand sign or the Pope hand sign. Pope hand sign is a name given to the median nerve palsy, where there is inability to flex these two fingers, right? Ulnar nerve palsy will have the same posture. Median nerve palsy will have the same posture, but this Benedict hand sign is always given to the injury by the median nerve. Question arises now, how to differentiate? Is it median? Is it ulnar? How to differentiate? Very simple. Ask the patient to flex. When you ask the patient to flex, then if the deformity is seen, it is Benedict. Without you asking the patient to do anything, if the deformity is visible, it simply means it's ulnar claw, isn't it? You don't ask anything, just see the hand. If it is like this, it's an ulnar nerve palsy. Ask the patient to flex all the fingers, he's able to do these two, not these two. It's a median nerve injury, right? So one is about clinically examining it, one is about automatically looking at it, right? That is Benedict hand sign, the ulnar and the median nerve injury. All in all, when these two injuries combine, what ma'am just said, that what is what we call a complete claw hand, like this. If you leave the patient in this posture, claw here, extension here, what is going to happen? After some time, the patient will develop some contractures. Now these contractures, if you allow them, it will is a permanent damage to the muscle. So what we do, we should extend the fingers, right? How to extend the fingers? I can only extend the fingers if I flex my joint from here. These are my knuckles, okay? So when I bend the knuckle, I get the length for the fingers to extend them. Okay, that's why the splint used for this claw is what you call a knuckle bender splint, right? Which has been an image-based question as well as theoretical question in last 2 years of your exams. Knuckle bender has been an image-based question last year, theoretical question in the year 2017 All India exam, right? So knuckle bender splint, which is used for the claw hand, bend the knuckles to get the length for the fingers. These two are the important nerves, important signs, and the splintage which is given for them.
In this ulnar nerve, we have just mentioned that the ulnar nerve is the one which is supplying all the interossei. Now over here, when we talk about the interossei, we are basically having two interossei. It includes the palmar and the dorsal interossei. One is the palmar interossei, another is the dorsal. Now this palmar interossei, it is responsible for the adduction of fingers. And this action, it is utilized again to check the integrity of this nerve. And the test which is used over here is the card test or the paper test. The card test or paper test, in this basically we are putting paper in between the fingers and we ask the patient to hold the paper by this adduction of fingers. If he is not able to keep it in the position and we try to pull the paper, he is not able to give resistance for this movement, we say the card test or the paper test is positive, and this is because the palmar interossei, they are affected in the ulnar nerve injury. Now when we talk about the dorsal interossei, it is responsible for abduction of the fingers. It is for the abduction of the fingers. And in this, again, we utilize this in a test, and the test which is used for this is Igawa test. We have the Igawa test for this. We ask the patient, we actually put pressure on the outside of the fingers of the patient and we ask the patient to open up the fingers. Now, when he is trying to opening up the fingers, this is basically the abduction which is performed by the dorsal interossei. If he is able to do this, that means the muscles are okay. And if he is not able to do this movement, again, the ulnar nerve injury is there.
Just to add on to it, the palmar interossei, they adduct, dorsal abduct. That means how to remember it? The pad and dab. That's the simplest way. That's how I used to learn it, right? The PAD and DAB. The pad, the palmar interossei, they will adduct and dorsal will abduct.
Now we come to the rest of the branches. Now we will come to the branches which are given off by the posterior cord. Now when we talk about the posterior cord, it is basically giving subscapular nerve. We have upper and lower subscapular nerve. The upper and lower subscapular nerve, it is supplying the subscapularis muscle. The upper and lower subscapular nerve, both these are supplying the subscapularis muscle. And the lower subscapular nerve, to be more specific, it supplies the teres major muscle. Then apart from this, we have another nerve, that is nerve to latissimus dorsi. This is also termed as the thoracodorsal nerve. The third is the axillary nerve. The axillary nerve, it supplies two muscles. One is the deltoid and another is the teres minor muscle. The fourth is the radial nerve. Over here, when we talk about the root values for these nerves, the root value of subscapular nerve, it is C5 and C6. For axillary, it is C5 and C6. For the nerve to latissimus dorsi, C6, C7 and C8. And the radial nerve is the one which is having all root values from C5 to T1. The radial nerve, The radial nerve is the one which actually supplies all the muscles towards the posterior side, for the posterior side of the arm as well as the posterior side of the forearm. So all the extensor muscles, these are being supplied by the radial nerve. And over here, as we said, for the median nerve, the branch of the median nerve is anterior introitious nerve. Over here, the branch of the radial nerve is the posterior introitious nerve. It is a posterior introitious nerve. This is actually the deep branch of radial nerve. The radial nerve, as it takes origin, it is running through the spiral groove on the posterior aspect of the humerus. And this is a very important relation, that this radial nerve, it runs in the spiral groove or the radial groove of the humerus and it is closely related to the humerus at this point or to the shaft of the humerus. And as it comes towards the cubital fossa on the lateral aspect, just opposite the neck of the radius, it divides into two branches. One is the superficial, another is the deep branch, which we have mentioned over here. The superficial branch, it is a sensory branch. It supplies on the dorsum of the hand, it is supplying this much area towards the lateral 3.5, except the nail beds. And when we talk about the deep branch, it is a motor branch which will be supplying the extensors of the forearm. In the extensors of forearm, it is supplying all the extensors of forearm except the brachioradialis and the extensor carpi radialis longus, which are actually supplied by the radial nerve directly. So in this we say the radial nerve, it directly supplies the brachioradialis and extensor carpi radialis longus, and the rest of the extensors of forearm, they are being supplied by this deep branch or the posterior introitious nerve.
Okay, so let's add a few important clinical things to the last thing, that this is the posterior cord. Now in this posterior cord, for me as an ortho person, important are two nerves here, that is one axillary nerve and second is the radial nerve. How the questions are framed for us in the exam, in the simple scenarios, what they ask you is, a patient is presenting post RTA in emergency, there is a fracture somewhere in the upper limb and now he is not able to externally rotate his arm, right? What is the site of fracture? So when he is not able to externally rotate the arm, we know that there are two rotators, external rotators. One is infraspinatus and other is a teres minor, right? So proximal humeral injuries, they basically involve what? The axillary nerve. Other way of asking you the same nerve injury is about the shoulder dislocation. How they ask you? What is the most common complication of shoulder dislocation? It is recurrence. Second is, what is the most common acute complication of shoulder dislocation? It is the axillary nerve injury. So when they ask you the most common complication of shoulder dislocation, recurrence, acute word, adding just one word will change the answer for you, and that is axillary. Axillary nerve injury per se will lead to both the symptoms, that is motor and sensory manifestations. Sensory would be loss of sensation here in the deltoid region. That is what you call a regimental badge sign. And in the motor, it affects two muscles, deltoid and teres minor. That means 15 to 90 degrees of abduction, deltoid function, and external rotation of the shoulder will be hampered if the axillary is gone. This axillary, again I repeat, will be injured in two conditions, proximal humeral fractures and shoulder dislocations. Okay, number two, about the radial nerve. Now this radial nerve is a continuation of the posterior cord of the brachial plexus. How it continues? It continues here on the medial side, then it winds around the back side, the middle part of the humerus, goes down to the lower shaft and in the spiral groove turns here, coming to the lateral side and reaching here on the lateral side, around the lateral epicondyle, it divides into two branches, right? One runs superficially on the forearm area, on the lateral aspect of the forearm area, that is a superficial branch of the radial nerve which supplies here the dorsum of first web space, as ma'am just explained. Second is posterior introitious nerve. How the clinically, questions are related with it, they simply say patient has a injury in the arm region and post injury he is unable to extend his wrist. What does that mean? When he is unable to extend his wrist, what has happened is wrist drop, right? So wrist drop is because of what? Radial nerve. What is the site which commonly involves the radial nerve? It is the shaft of humerus. In this shaft of humerus, what is the commonest site which involves the shaft of humerus? Upper third, middle third or lower third? So simple answer, do remember friends, it is distal 1/3 of humerus, which most often involves the radial nerve. And if the radial nerve is involved, it will lead to what? The wrist drop. Second, around the lateral epicondyle, the radial nerve divides into two branches. I said superficial branch runs here superficially. One branch goes behind the posterior, this introitious membrane, known as the posterior introitious membrane. Okay, this PIN is usually injured in all the trauma, all the conditions which involve the radial head. For example, the Monteggia fracture. What happens in Monteggia? Fracture of proximal ulna. Okay, fracture of proximal ulnar shaft here with dislocation of the radial head here. When the radial head is dislocated, the branch which is given next to radial head, that is the PIN, it will be damaged. PIN is responsible for extension of the fingers. Of the wrist is by the radial nerve, of the finger is by the PIN. So when the PIN is involved, or in other words, if I say, if there is a Monteggia fracture, the patient has got a tendency to have a finger drop. He won't be able to extend the fingers. Extension of the wrist will be preserved by what? As ma'am has already explained, extensor carpi radialis longus, ECRL. So if somebody is having a Monteggia fracture, he can very well have a finger drop. Extension of wrist will be preserved by extensor carpi radialis longus, right? So finger drop, Monteggia, radial head, wrist drop, fracture shaft of humerus, distal 1/3, and then if the patient, you leave them in like this in for a long time or like this for a long time, what will happen? This area will develop a contracture. So we can't allow the patient to be like this for a long time. So what we do, we elevate the wrist, right? We elevate the wrist so that there is no contracture. These kind of splintages are known as cock-up splint. Image of cock-up splint was there in this recent examination that we had, right? 2020 exam that we had. So knuckle bender splint we have used for the claw hand, and cock-up splint we are using here for the radial nerve or the PIN injury, right? So these are different nerves. They are clinically relevant, important informations, how the questions can be framed for us.
In this, as we just discussed, the regimental badge, in this I would like to add that the cutaneous nerve which is arising from the axillary nerve. So we should be aware of these cutaneous nerves coming from this. The axillary nerve, it gives a nerve, cutaneous nerve, that is the upper, it is the upper lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm. So when we talk about upper lateral cutaneous nerve of arm, it is a branch of axillary nerve. And when we talk about the lower lateral cutaneous nerve of arm, it is actually a branch of radial nerve. So for the radial nerve, lower lateral cutaneous nerve of arm. And apart from this, we have two more cutaneous nerves. One is the posterior cutaneous nerve of arm, and the other is posterior cutaneous nerve of forearm. And all these three cutaneous nerves, these are given above the elbow. So if there is any injury of the radial nerve at the elbow or below the elbow, the sensory loss is not seen in these areas. So we have just discussed, along with the nerves, we have also discussed the cutaneous nerves, and now we know that on the medial side, the medial cutaneous nerve of arm and forearm, these two are the branches of brachial plexus. When we talk about the lateral side, the upper lateral cutaneous nerve, it is a branch of axillary. The lower lateral cutaneous nerve of arm, these both, the lower lateral cutaneous nerve of arm, it is a branch of radial. And on the lower side, the lower lateral cutaneous nerve of forearm, it is a branch of musculocutaneous. For the posterior side, for both arm and forearm, the cutaneous nerves, these are the branches of the radial nerve.
So guys, that is all we have in this video about brachial plexus, the integrated one from NEET to the next, from DBMCI, the anatomy and orthopedics, and you'll have many more like these, and your inputs, your suggestions are most welcome, and definitely we'll try to give you the best we can, and surely we both will do it, right? So all the best to everyone, and study well, study nicely, study smartly, get the good results. Thank you so much.
Thank you.